Before we get into today's video, I just want to shout out you guys for all the support on the laddering video. Like, I wasn't expecting it to blow up as much as it did, to be honest. I was just rambling about the fact that I just thought ladder for, skill progression and recognition in the community was probably not the best way to go around it. And it was a pretty positively received video. I know some people, like, I know there was some guy in the comment section saying that, like, I was being overly cynical, but I was just like, I was explaining the facts at this point. So, it's just how it is. And I did say in the video, not everything I'm going to say in this video is going to apply to a lot of people, and that's literally what I said in the video. But yeah, do want to shout you guys out for that support. We're almost at 480 subscribers, 21 away from 500, and I know we can definitely make it. But yeah, thanks for the support on that video, and let's get right into it. Alright guys, today is the 31st of October, the last day of the month. That means the 35 pokes final tier list video. This is the factual 100% correct tier list, and if you don't agree, you can go outside. I'm joking. But we're gonna be going over the last tier list. To be honest, I made a last tier list like around the 10th or 15th of October, and I really don't think anything really changed in the metagame, especially after Bisharp ban didn't go through, and I was just like, well, this metagame is pretty much just gonna stay the same throughout. Don't really see how much it can really change. It's quite a centralizing meta compared to previous metas that we've had in the past, but it's a thing where, like that tier list that I made, like if you look into the Discord on 35 pokes and I sent the last tier list, it's pretty much just gonna be that same tier list with probably some tweaks around. I'm not going to copy straight for straight because my thoughts from then are slightly going to be different from now, but at the end of the day, we still just have the same tier, and we have S to unmon status, and yeah, we're just going to do it individually by one by one. But before we get into the VR, subscribe to the channel, join the kingdom. We're on our way to 1,000 subscribers by the end of the year, almost at 500. Would much appreciate it if you guys enjoy this video and subscribe if you're not subscribed. But either way, let's get on to it. We're going to start off with Blastoise here, and 31 days into the month, and I think everyone knew Blastoise was pretty much a top 5 mon, and yeah, it deserves its place in A-. If there was to be a second suspect test that we could have afforded to run this month, it probably would have been Blastoise to get the second suspect test, mainly because the Shell Smash sets, sometimes they can be a bit overwhelming, and once his chips are checked, like, realistically, like, some of the best Blastoise answers include Sylveon and Amoonguss, and those were some of the most common mons that we had in the month, so obviously explains why their usage is probably going to be high when we get the usage stats. But, Blastoise was a very dangerous Pokemon once it got going. It has enough bulk to set up. It does good enough damage at +2, even though its offensive stats aren't that high. +2 is still +2, and if you look at the average bulk of the tier, fair enough, it's one of the more bulkier metas in terms of even just base stats, but Blastoise can still just break most of the tier at +2, and it was getting interesting when people started to run like physical max attack Blastoise, because you'd invite in the Sylveon, assuming Sylveon is just going to take +2 surf pretty comfortably, and then you just get hit by wave crash and you're dead. So Blastoise was a bit weird in that sense, where you never really knew what it was going to do. Like, you knew Shell Smash was coming, but at the same time you don't know if your Sylveon's about to take a wave crash or you're just going to get free hit killed by surf, so it's just one of them ones, innit? But also Blastoise was appreciated for his defensive traits. As a rapid spinner, it was a good pivot with flip turn, had scald, had body press, so it actually ended up checking a lot of the physically defensive, physical attackers in the tier, such as Bisharp. Honchkrow, well, it's a shaky Honchkrow check at best, it has no recovery, but it's more of a thing that I was able to check Bisharp effectively with body press. Obviously body press is a ×4 effective move on Bisharp, and it also checked M-Ball to a certain extent as well. So defensive Blastoise had its place, and obviously offensive Blastoise was a very dangerous Pokemon in the tier, so that's why it's going to be an A-. Now, Alolan Dug Trio, I'm definitely putting this thing in A, but in my last tier list I put it in B+, because I knew that this one could actually do something. Like, his stabs are pretty strong into a lot of the common stuff, and it actually does have a good damage output, but like, the more I faced it, the more the mon was actually genuinely annoying for my sort of builds. Like, I was spamming Scyther a lot, Sylveon, Sandaconda. Well, Dugtrio beats Sylveon Sylveon, obviously, because it's a steel type, and you know, Sandaconda still takes decent damage from Life Orb Earthquake. So it's a thing where if your Sandaconda is like getting chipped, you haven't had the opportunity to rest, for example, you know, Dugtrio is going to be a very dangerous Pokemon for you to try and switch into. It's one of the faster mons in the tier as well, gets the jump on things like Scyther, Munkidori, Bisharp. Like most of the offensive metagame, Dugtrio can outspeed and hit for a good amount of damage. So I have to actually put my respect on this guy, especially like towards the start of the month, or at the start of the month, where I didn't think it was mid. Some people thought this one was bad, but I was just like, bros, like this thing actually does a lot, especially with its dual stabs. It has Stone Edge to hit Scyther. The only issue is that obviously it's frailty, like it's not switching into any hits realistically. Even like Spadef Sylveon with 0 special attack investments, probably 3 hit killing with Hyper Voice. So you know, it's not too hard to position. I feel like we have a good enough pivots to pivot this thing in quite effectively, but it's more like in the late game, this is probably one of the better cleaners just because of its speed and damage output. So yeah, I kind of have to respect it in A. Now Gengar, I don't know about Gengar, you know, because like I do want to put this in A. I might need an A minus. It really depends on how it's looking right now. But I don't really think Dugtrio and Gengar are too comparable in terms of their viability. I do think Dugtrio is a bit better because Gengar at least has competition with Hisuian and Zoroark. And even those guys, I felt like they were slightly falling off towards the end of the month, as, you know, Bisharp didn't get banned. And people were just like, well, if Bisharp got banned, you know, the ghost types would be broken and all that sort of nonsense. So it's a thing where, you know, Gengar, it was a solid mon. I would say that. It has the same speed as Alolan Dugtrio. Pretty much threatens all the common defensive cores that we had. Like the defensive core of Sylveon, Amoonguss, Sandaconda, Gengar can just beat that at +2. Like if it manages to get a nasty plot off, that mon is killing all of those guys. So you know, it was a dangerous mon for balanced structures for sure. If you're running like hyper offense, you probably had your Gengar answers, you had your Scarf Bisharp or any other speed control option, and that's not stopping Gengar from running Choice Scarf, for example, but it's not its best set in my opinion. Like having the breaking power of Nasty Plot or just running some sort of offensive Life Orb set, or even Choice Specs. I did see a Choice Specs once or twice on the ladder, and that mon was very scary to switch into. Its stabs also are something that the tier didn't necessarily handle that well, and even some of its more niche checks, like AV Guzzled would probably handle Gengar pretty well, but you can't even Pursuit Trap that. So yeah, you'd have to take that into account. And obviously it could also run items like Colbur Berry, get the jump up on Bisharp, because Focus Blast is always going to kill Bisharp. So you know, it had the versatility to work, and but I do think Dugtrio was the more consistent one. As we go down in this list, we'll see if I need an A minus or not. I'm probably not going to do a B minus either, because that distinction between C and B minus is probably so negligible. I don't probably need a separate tier for that. Munkidori, well, like, it was the same thing with Gengar, for example. Like, people are using Munkidori. It has a better shot of breaking the... No, it's worse at breaking Sandaconda than Gengar, but it's better at breaking Amoonguss and Sylveon, which, you know, has to be respected. Obviously, you have Stab Psychic and Psyshock to obviously nuke Amoonguss at +2. It's basically just a slower Gengar with a worse primary typing. It has Psychic, Gengar's a ghost type, and obviously you're getting checked by Gengar and Zoroark pretty badly because they're faster than you. So this one was slightly less consistent than those guys, but it can still definitely get the job done in terms of breaking the common defensive cores. Other than that, didn't really do much else, but you know, what it did was pretty good, all things considered, so I'm going to put it in B+. Not much else I have to really say about Munkidori here. Like, Choice Scarf sets were okay, but you know, it was just mainly Nasty Plot sets. Also could just run Colbur Berry to 1v1 Bisharp and pray you land Focus Blast. But yeah, Sandaconda was probably an issue for it as well, because you could never really OHKO that unless you're running Psychic. But at that point, like, you have Poison Stab to deal with Sylveon, so you could actually afford to run Psychic. So you'd have a decent shot of breaking Sandaconda. But yeah, basically Gengar, but just slightly worse. So I wouldn't really put them in the same tier. Rhydon, maybe it's my Rhydon bias, but like, I really want to put this thing in A. Like, my success with Rhydon has actually been crazy. I do think it's like, is adjacent to Sandaconda in a way where you get that flying resistance, which Sandaconda sometimes will struggle to, against Honchkrow. Like, if a low Sandaconda is on the field, then Honchkrow would always end up revenging it, and Rhydon always having that flying resist is something that, you know, Sandaconda just didn't have, and is an adjacent and an alternative in my opinion, and it's the physically most bulkiest Pokemon in the tier by a landslide. Having 120 defense plus Eviolite just made this thing incredibly hard to break down on the physical side. Emboar couldn't really kill it at +1 even, and you'll just counter back. It's pretty much taken every physical hit in the tier, even from some of the strongest Pokemon such as, you know, Blastoise. Like, even Blastoise Waterfall or Liquidation at +0 is like not even doing like 80% to Rhydon. That's just how bulky it is on the physical side. It was also a good Scyther check as well. Obviously the cons of Rhydon, like, you don't have Shed Skin Rest, you don't have Glare. You know, your times fall weak to water and grass. It doesn't really help its defensive profile whatsoever, but, you know, I still thought it was a pretty solid Pokemon to use. It could actually somewhat 1v1 Sandaconda, like, and the counter was a nice surprise factor because you chip it down with EQ. Like, Rhydon is not a slouch in the damage department, even without attack investment. So you'll try and do that. If Sandaconda is like at 60, they're not going to arrest immediately. They'll try and glare you, probably chip you down because you are weak to ground, but you're not taking that much damage, and then you'll just counter back and Sandaconda's dead. So, like, I've had interactions like that, and I do think Rhydon, you know, was somewhat slept on, and a lot of people just thought, yeah, it's just worse Sandaconda in every way, but they have different things that they could fulfill, and you know, I saw the potential in Rhydon in it. But Scyther though, this might be a crazy thing for me, but I'm putting Scyther in A+, man. This mod is crazy. Like, honestly, like, when I discovered the SD Trailblaze sets with dual wing beat and close combat, I was just like, Scyther's probably one of the most dangerous sweepers in this tier. Like, it's actually crazy. You know, Scyther has a lot of damage. It's basically like Honchkrow, but a lot faster, and you know, has much better coverage. Like, CC is like factually superior to Superpower, so, you know, you have that Technician dual wing beat. Just having that speed 10 in general is just something that put it above Honchkrow. And obviously, spoiler, I'm putting Honchkrow in A+ as well, but I do think Scyther was a more consistent wall breaker just because of the fact that it was faster. It could outspeed Magmortar, Porygon Z. It could outspeed. It didn't have to speed tie. Well, you don't speed tie with Samurott, but, you know, just outspeeding something like that, Porygon Z, Magmortar, was just pretty good for Scyther. Like, you could always afford to run an Adamant Nature, which you couldn't really do with Honchkrow. Honchkrow would love to have that Adamant Nature on its Sucker Punches, but, you know, couldn't afford that, or else you'd be slower than Bisharp and Samurott and other mons around that speed tier. But, you know, Scyther had the ability to wall break quite effectively, and also Scyther was probably the second best defogger in the tier, just behind Noivern here. And you know, I like the pivoting sets as well, because you could always run Roost, U-turn, Roost, dual wing beat. You know, probably if you weren't running defog because you had Spin Blastoise, you could always just go a pivot set with U-turn, CC, dual wing beat, and Roost. And, like, it would be pretty hard to, you know, stop Scyther from just doing a lot of that stuff, because it had boots, so it's not like it's taking rocks damage from hazards. So it's like, you just keep U-turning around, getting your mons in, and it was a pretty solid pivot. But to be fair, I was mainly running defog on those sort of pivoting sets, just because I was like, I didn't want to rely on spin. Not that spin was bad, but if I want to run spin, it was more like I would have to run like a defensive Blastoise, when on this sort of team that I was building, it would be better for me to use Shell Smashing Blastoise, which I don't really want to use Rapid Spin for, you know. So yeah, there was just things like that. Now Snorlax, unfortunately, I'm gonna have to put Snorlax in I'm not gonna put in C, because it's still a Snorlax. I do think that it has its traits, but, like, it really didn't really account to much in the tier, which is a shame, to be honest, because with all the scary special attackers flying around, you'd think Snorlax would come out of hiding and do Snorlax things, but it was just that Sylveon was a much more consistent special due to the fact that it just had higher special defense. Its HP stat, even though it's much lower than Snorlax, still kind of didn't really matter in the long run, because of the fact that Sylveon had Wish and it was still genuinely bulky. So, like, you see Snorlax, which is somewhat passive, kind of just lets in the ghost types for free, and you know, you have Sylveon with a lot more utility under its belt, like Baton Pass and Wishing. It also had Toxic Heal Bell, like, and it was just like, what am I using Snorlax for? Like, it's a case with some of these mons where the use case was a bit ambiguous, you know. So it's a thing where what am I using Snorlax for? You want to try and use it for Curse. It's a bit inconsistent at that. You want it to be a special wall. Well, you're going to invite in the Fizz Death walls, which kind of don't really care about Snorlax, especially if it's not setting up. And like, it's just slow as well. Like, you actually have to run some speed to not speed tie with a Moongus and let it just spoil you for free. And then you don't actually end up beating a Moongus in a 1v1 anyway. So it's a thing where, like, Snorlax just failed to establish a niche for itself, but at the same time, like, it did manage to do some things that I saw. So it was a thing where I'm not gonna put in C, because C, I'm gonna reserve C for the ones that genuinely are not good Pokemon at all, and Snorlax is still Snorlax at the end of the day. But yeah, on to our next Mon, Blossom. I'm putting this thing in Onmon. Genuinely has no niche in this tier. Like, it's scary, because like, if a Moongus wasn't in this tier, Blossom probably could have done something. But as long as a Moongus exists, there's no reason to use Blossom on a serious team. Quiver Dance sets unfortunately don't make any wind at all because of its lack of coverage and its monograss typing. Quiver Dance, like, you're still losing to Scyther. Like, Scyther times 4 resist grass, Moongus times 4 resist grass. You know, you still have steel types flying around. Like, you just lack the coverage to do anything. Like, say this thing was like a victory bell, because obviously Blossom evolves from a Gen 1 Pokemon, you know, Oddish, Vileplume and all of that stuff. But like, if it had like Weather Ball or just any sort of fire coverage, like, or Earth Power would be very useful. Sunflora has Earth Power, but you know, it would actually be a decent, you know, sweeper or Quiver Dance, I think, just because it has the coverage to hit the fires and the steel types. But you know, it lacks that coverage, so it really just amounts to nothing. The best set people used was SD, and that just goes to show that Blossom was not a good mon if you have to resort to using Swords Dance on a Pokemon that's not known for being a physical attacker. Don't get it twisted though, it has 80 base attack, but is not a physical attacker by any means. But it had much better coverage on that side, and you know, if you wanted to have fun, you could use SD Blossom, but just know it has 50 base speed and practically loses to every single top mon, you know, that actually gets used. So that's why I'm putting in the on-mon status. Sudowoodo, tough one to put here. I don't want to put in C, because like, at the start of the meta, like, HO structures were using this as the lead. Well, and you know what, I'll just drop it to C. It's slightly too niche for my liking. As the metagame started to actually stabilize a little bit, you know, no one was really using Sudowoodo as like HO lead anymore, because it's just a thing where you're just down a mon later on in the game, just because Sudowoodo doesn't amount to anything other than, you know, clicking Stealth Rocks, exploding or Cust Up that has Sturdy. It's effective at doing that, but other than that, there's just isn't much reason of using it, and you know, there's not much else to say. Like, if you want a defensive rock type, you have Rhydon. If you want a defensive Pokemon in general, you still have Sandaconda, you still have Stunfisk, Amoonguss. Like, it just didn't really amount to anything, which is a shame, because it's a funny mon. Like, to be honest, it's a funny mon. Rock Polish could have done something. At least it's not going in on-mon status, because it can do something. Like, you're not expecting Blossom to do anything, but at least you think Sudowoodo's going to do something. So yeah, I'm going to put in C. Same thing with Survivor. I'm not going to lie, I did lose to Survivor at one point, but genuinely it's just one of those mons that's never really going to succeed, especially when this metagame has been at such a higher power level compared to other metagames. I'm pretty sure Survivor was legal in the 35 Pokes June metagame, and even then, it was still struggling in a much lower power level metagame. So it's just one of those mons that, from the stats and everything, it just can't really succeed that much. Unless you're going to put Survivor against not fully evolved Pokemon, I just don't really see it ever really amounting to much in any of these metagames. So, you know, but it's fun though. Has Glare, has Coil, can do some stuff, but the stats just let it down. Like, if it had better stats, it would be a much better Pokemon. What can I say? Vigoroth, also a mon I'm putting in C. Doesn't really do anything either. It's just kind of like Snorlax in a sense, where the use case is even more ambiguous to try and find out what Vigoroth can attempt to do. Some people try to make bulk up work, but you know, like, it is stronger. It's not even stronger than Snorlax, but it's a thing where it's bulky on the physical side, immune to sleep. And like, that immunity to sleep is helpful if you want to build with it, because you can always come in on a Moongus for an example. But yeah, it's just not a good mon, especially in this power level. Like, if it was in other meta games where the power level was much lower, I think Vigoroth could potentially do something, but there's just a lot that can stop it from really doing what it needs to do. And yeah, just never really impressed me. No one really used it. I could expect this mon to be in like the top 5 least used Pokemon by tomorrow, but yeah, we'll see. C. Ninjask, definitely an on-mon as well, but better than Blossom. Just use Scyther. There's not really much reason to use Ninjask. Like, it has SD speed boost, but lacks the coverage to even use it effectively, unless you want to go Power Herb Dig, which again is a one-time use. You're dropping heavy duty boots. Like, do I really have to say more about Ninjask? Like, it's just outclassed as a flying type, and you know, there's no demand for a bug type, but if you do want to use a bug type, you have Vikavolt. So yeah, Ninjask is not a good Pokemon. Honchkrow, though, on the other hand, is a pretty solid Pokemon, and I'm putting it in A+. Honchkrow is also quite a threatening Pokemon, Bisharp-esque in a way where it has a high damage output, might lack knockoff and strong dark stab in general, but Honchkrow is quite versatile in what abilities it can run. Insomnia, of course, I didn't want to run Insomnia, but sleep was annoying me, so I kind of just had to resort to running Insomnia. Super Luck, Scope Lens, let it, you know, have a reliable dark option with crit Night Slash, which again doesn't seem that strong because Night Slash is genuinely a weak move, but like when Honchkrow is running it, it can run a guaranteed crit and it actually does good damage. But the thing that Honchkrow was most known for was being faster than Bisharp at one stage by 1 point. So that meant that regardless of whether Bisharp had set up, Honchkrow could always survive the +2 Sucker Punch, assuming it wasn't below half HP, and you know, could always just click Superpower back to Oko Bisharp. And yeah, it was one of the most reliable offensive Bisharp answers, and offensive powerhouse in its own right, because you know, Sandaconda was so common, and that gets free hit KO'd. Amoonguss gets Oko'd by Brave Bird. Sylveon wants no business switching into Honchkrow, so it's a thing where this one was threatening the common defensive cores, had a variety in sets. It could go Choice Scarf, Boots. It also had Defog. And yeah, Honchkrow was definitely one of the best mons in this metagame, and you know, I think most of the player base realized that. And some people even wanted Honchkrow to get banned, just because they basically thought it was Bisharp 2.0. You know, it was faster, had superpower, Brave Bird was pretty difficult to switch into, and it could also snowball potential with Moxie, boosting its attack stat and making it harder for even things like Sandaconda to switch in reliably if they weren't at full HP. But yeah, onto Magmortar here. Magmortar deserves the B+ from me. I've used it. You know, it's one of the best sleep absorbing Pokemon thanks to its ability Vital Spirit. Like Vigoroth has the Vital Spirit ability. A lot better than Vigoroth though, because Magmortar can actually threaten a good amount with its special attack and options. Sylveon doesn't want to switch into it, surprisingly or not, because it has the move Acid Spray. So what Acid Spray does, half Sylveon's special defense, and then you just click Fire Blast and Sylveon's getting to it killed by Fire Blast. It's quite a funny interaction to do. Magmortar was genuinely just a hard mon to switch into. Even if you're running defensive Blastoise, for example, and Blastoise is still bulky on both the defense and special defense side, especially with max HP investment, your Acid Spray on the Blastoise trying to switch into a Fire Blast, you T-Bolt it at -2 special defense, and if it's not a Spadef Blastoise, it's simply getting Oko'd. So like, obviously Magmortar had a way of beating in its checks, and it's a funny Pokemon. Only thing holding it back is realistically speed tier and pretty shit physical bulk. You know, like, it's faster than the things like Bisharp and Honchkrow, but you know, those things can revenge kill it if it's even at like 60%, just because of the fact that its Fizz Def is so low. And you also couldn't really run its superior ability in Flame Body. At least you could try and fish for burns in that way, but at the same time, you kind of need Vital Spirit if your team doesn't really have the best Amoonguss Spore switch-ins. So yeah, overall, Magmortar was a pretty fun Pokemon to use this month, and yeah, definitely deserves the B+, you know, ranking here. Porygon Z here, and if someone comments down how I'm saying Porygon Z, I'm actually just going to find your house. But I'm joking. But you know, I'm gonna put it in B+ as well. I would say it was more consistent than Monkey Dory in the long run, just because the fact that it wasn't really, it's not weak to Ghost, and you know, the Ghost types were pretty good like Gengar, and it also wasn't weak to Dark, so you know, you have to take that into account. Porygon Z was quite scary because of download boost. It could go download choice specs or just run adaptability. It's a mon that somewhat started to fall off a little bit. I didn't really see much Porygon Z getting used, but at the same time, it's definitely one of the most dangerous Pokemon to switch into in the tier. Even Bisharp has no business wanting to switch into like a boosted Porygon Z or Life Orb 1 with adaptability, or even a download boost you know, applied to it. So yeah, it was a consistent special breaker. Obviously had its flaws. There's still mons that were faster than it, and it's still physically frail. But other than that, like, its damage output has to be respected, and B+ warrants its placement. Embo though, Embo's getting put in we'll see how A plus is looking later, but I'm gonna put Ember on A plus just because it was one of the most dangerous Pokemon to switch into. It wall broke very hard. Wall broke sounds like very wrong to me, but it's correct grammar at this point. You know, it was a Pokemon that had to be respected in the builder as well, because again, like I said, Sandaconda, Amoonguss, Sylveon calls were very easy to spam. You'll probably add Blastoise just to have that fire resist, but at the same time, nothing really wanted to switch into Banded Ember whatsoever. CC does a lot. Flare Blitz, like you'll realistically just click Reckless Flare Blitz and you'll manage to 2-hit KO the entire tier at a minimum. Even Blastoise had no business switching into Ember, and if it was defensive, you know, you still had Wild Charge to 2-hit KO. You'd see that was defensive and then just click it again, or anticipate the Sandaconda coming in and bringing your own Blastoise or one that could deal with Sandaconda in general if your choice locked. But yeah, Scarf Ember also saw some usage as well. Shame it did not outspeed Noivern, but at the same time, you know, it outsped everything else and it could get the surprise factor sort of thing in, which is pretty important in 35 pokes. So, you know, versatility of sets, overall damage output puts Ember on A+, and it was definitely one of the strongest Pokemon in the metagame. Now, Stoutland is a mon that I was genuinely disappointed in. I never really saw Stoutland as anything too crazy, just because of the fact that Ghost, like Houndstone, I was using a lot of Houndstone in the early days, and Houndstone is still a solid Pokemon, but you could just end up hardwalling Stoutland without any issues. A lot of people were spamming like Sandspit, Sandaconda plus Sandrush, Stoutland. Too many S's in there, I can't lie. But you know, and it still genuinely wasn't threatening. like Stoutland is one of those mons on paper seemed okay, but just never really like took off that much, because again, it's still at the average speed tier. It still outsped things like Honchkrow and Bisharp, of course, but like it was a thing where it was never really being that impressive, and like it could just be easily handled, to be honest. Like no one was afraid of a Stoutland. Like if your team was losing to Stoutland, that was probably a builder issue, I'm not gonna lie. But yeah, Stoutland was just genuinely just a mid Pokemon overall. Like if there was an epitome of mid that I could give to any Pokemon in the 35 pokes meta, Stoutland fits that description perfectly. It wasn't anything crazy, but it wasn't anything bad. Like, it just was in the middle, so it's mid. But yeah, onto Amoonguss. Definitely one of the most annoying mons in this meta game. Low-key made me debate Sleep going ahead in the 35 pokes meta game, just because of the fact that Amoonguss applied so much pressure, and it was very hard to not have that pressure being applied to your teams if you didn't have your own Amoonguss or a Sleep Absorber, because once Amoonguss came in on one of your mons, you basically just had to sack something to sleep every single time if you lacked your own Amoonguss. And there was a thing where so many of my games came down to Amoonguss versus Amoonguss, who's going to swap out first, and a lot of people just decided to swap out first versus me. I was willing to go PP war for, you know, Amoonguss versus Amoonguss. I'm not going to lie to you guys, like I really didn't want to have something going to sleep, so it was just an annoying mon in terms of like general metagame health. It's not like Amoonguss is ever a broken mon. It's a defensive piece that, you know, isn't OHKO and everything, but sporing everything is not particularly fun either. But definitely in the top 5 most used mons in the tier, and it just goes to show how bulky it is, how annoying Spore is, and you know, it's why I like spamming a lot of flying type Pokemon like Scyther and Honchkrow, because they would always threaten Amoonguss out, and I would always run something with these guys to deal with Sandaconda, because Sandaconda was their immediate switching, and that core was just very annoying to take down. The longevity of that core was also very annoying to deal with. Amoonguss has Regenerator, Sandaconda could just click rest and instantly wake up the next turn due to its ability, and yeah, it was just hard to break those guys down in general. So yeah, had to put Amoonguss in A-, obviously. Stunfisk, I'll give Stunfisk the benefit of the doubt. Not anything I saw too crazy of it, but I'll put it above Snorlax and Stoutland here, just because of the fact that I actually did see Stunfisk do some stuff with some of Assault Vest sets. It is quite bulky on the special side, just due to its high HP stat, and it could actually 1v1 Blastoise pretty effectively, which I kind of do have to put respect on its name. But yeah, not much else to really stay on Stunfisk. Not a mon I used often. Did definitely prefer Sandaconda and Rhydon if I wanted to use a ground type, but like Stunfisk isn't as bad as I thought. I initially thought going into this metagame. Now onto Bisharp, the #1 Pokemon of this tier, the mon that has to be respected by every single builder and player that played this month. Bisharp was the best Pokemon in this tier, and if you disagree with that, I would have to say you're wrong, unfortunately. That's all I have to say, really. But I've explained many a time, in text and you know, on Smogon forums, where I thought Bisharp was a menace in this tier and deserved to get banned. It wasn't anything too like, I'm not gonna say Bisharp was super broken. We've seen Doublade in 35 pokes metagames, and that one just to it cures everything. SDs has a lot of versatility in his move pool, but Bisharp was a bit more one-dimensional in the sense where it was always going to be running the same moves. You're always going to see knock or sucker punch. You're going to always see iron head, SD, low kick to beat other Bisharps. Like, his move set was pretty limited in terms of what it was running, but at the same time, it just applied so much pressure. Knock is the freest move in the game, and is a thing where it always just couldn't knock on its checks. It was wearing down its checks eventually. Its teammates could always just handle the ones that it couldn't handle. Like, if you had Fizz Death Blastoise, you could always switch in on the Sandaconda, get glared, have a slow flip turn out because they're always going to swap out. And there's a thing where Bisharp was always just knocking, and then in the late game, if it got one SD up, it would just click Sucker Punch on everything and Oko everything. So it was a very dangerous Pokemon to deal with, and I would have appreciated if it did get banned. I felt like I would have played a lot more games in the latter half of the month if Bisharp got banned, but at the same time, I can blame work and, you know, other life stuff to that can get added into the mix there. But yeah, Bisharp was the best Pokemon this month, and I wish it did get banned. But yeah, we still have this meta game at hand. But yeah, Doublade going in on Mon status. This one is us. You know, there are some people that saw some potential in Doublade, but his typing, even though it's one of the best typings in the game overall, in this meta game, Doublade's typing had no business. There was too many darks. There were fire types that could easily nuke it, and the special bulk is still us. Like, even if you invest max special defense, Eviolite, like, fair enough, you handle Sylveon better, but you still have things to worry about, like Blastoise, Gengar, Porygon Z. To be fair, you actually do wall Porygon Z quite effectively, but you still have other ones that can run Ghost and Dark coverage, Clawitzer even, and it's just a thing where Doublade was not a consistent defensive piece in the tier whatsoever, so you kind of have to take that into account. So yeah, was not impressed with Doublade whatsoever. Alright guys, I'm back. I just had to quickly pause the video. My nose was getting congested. Regardless, we're moving on to Clawitzer, and I'm really putting a toss-up between A and B+. I do want to put Clawitzer in A due to my bias, but if I want to be as least biased as possible, I probably have to put in B+, just because of the fact that, you know, a lot of people thought Clawitzer was a bit mid. I have to disagree heavily. I do think it was definitely one of the more difficult Pokemon to switch into as well. It was hard to position at points, but at the same time, it's definitely one of my more favorite special breakers I use throughout the month. More than Magmortar, more than Porygon Z, more than Monkey Dory, for example. And Clawitzer did have some results for me. It was more like people ran Choice Specs, and I was like, Choice Specs was too difficult to run because it would lock itself into one move. And you know, it was easy to kind of stop its stabs in a sense, because obviously Mega Launcher basically gave Dark Pulse, Dragon Pulse, Aura Sphere stab essentially. But it's a thing where if you locked yourself into fighting, Amoonguss would easily come out. If you locked yourself, and Ghost types obviously, if you locked yourself into Dragon Pulse, which I wasn't even running that much, Sylveon will just come in on you as well. So Life Orb was the in-between there. I slightly lose out on damage, but at the same time I can switch my moves around, and it was a lot easier to wall break in the sense and get my prediction game on point, where I knew when a certain mon was coming out, and you know, Clawitzer could click Water Pulse on that mon, or Dark Pulse, or Aura Sphere. So yeah, overall I would say Clawitzer for me was a consistent Pokemon. Definitely not as consistent as the mons in A, but definitely something that had to be respected as well. Sylveon, I have to put, like, it's a toss-up between putting Blastoise in second place or Sylveon in second place. Probably gonna put Sylveon in second place. The way that Sylveon held this tier together has to be, you know, rewarded and you know, clapped for, to be honest, because of the fact that it was one of the best Shell Smash Blastoise switch-ins. Most special attackers, other than like Gengar and Monkey Dory, really didn't want to handle Sylveon in general, and you know, it was just a corner piece of the tier where I feel like a lot of the tier would have fallen apart if we didn't have Sylveon. Just one of those glue mons that always managed to do something on a game-to-game basis, whether that was walling special attackers, wishing its teammates with a slow baton pass into them, having Toxic to 1v1 a lot of Pokemon. And fair enough, there was a bit of moose slot syndrome between the baton pass and Toxic, because I do think you need Hyper Voice, Wish, Protect most likely. I was starting to drop Protect a little bit because I really wanted to have Toxic back onto my Sylveon. It was just a nice move to have. generally. But you know, but Baton Pass was also pretty useful, and I do think you kind of need to run that a bit more because of the fact that Amoonguss was a very annoying Pokemon. It always came in on Sylveon, unless it was an offensive Sylveon and you click like Mystical Fire or Psychic or Psyshock, for example. But yeah, defensive Sylveon's always letting Amoonguss, so having that you know, BP on deck meant that you could always pivot out on Amoonguss and getting either Scyther, Honchkrow, Magmortar, pretty much anything that beat Amoonguss in a 1v1 in on the field to, you know, keep momentum up. And keeping momentum was the key of this metagame, I think, making sure you weren't on the back seat or else your opponent would have an easier time, you know. So yeah, things like that. Noivern here, I'm gonna put Noivern in A-. I feel like the Bird Trinity or Scyther, Noivern and Honchkrow, they kind of just go hand in hand. Noivern was pretty much the fastest spammable Pokemon in this tier, and it was very annoying to deal with, especially if you weren't really running Sylveon teams or your Sylveon was dead, because it applies a lot of pressure. It doesn't seem like it does because Sylveon always just came in on Noivern and Noivern was always forced to U-turn out. But if you got rid of the Sylveon, Noivern was applying pressure like no one else. Like, it's attacking options of Draco, Hurricane, and Heat Wave pretty much hit the entire tier, and especially when your strongest stab option is not being hit into an immunity, it was very hard to switch into Draco Meteors. A lot of people were running Specs Noivern, Boots Noivern with Defog. It was as versatile as I say Honchkrow and Scyther were, because they were offensive threats that could afford to run Defog, and even though people didn't want to run Defog on them, I would say they were good defoggers, due to the fact that, you know, you didn't always want to be running Spin Blastoise. But it's a thing where hazard stacking wasn't that crazy, but it was more like you don't want to constantly have rocks up for your monster to be taking 12%, excluding the fact if they resist rock or not. But yeah, Noivern was probably the most versatile guys out of the birds, and its speed tier came into clutch many a time. Also checked Embo quite effectively, unless Embo started running Head Smash for whatever reason. But you know, it was just one of those guys as well. So yeah, Noivern is definitely up there with these guys. Vikavolt, a weird one for me, because like I would say it's in the similar position as these guys. Like B+ is literally just full of special attackers that, you know, aren't as consistent as the A rank mons. But is Vikavolt with these guys? Like, it's a tough decision for me, genuinely, because I don't think Vikavolt's better than these guys. So, like, okay, that's an easy solution there. If I don't think Vikavolt is better than these guys, then it's not going in A. So I'll put in B+. I'll put it below Magmortar due to the fact that Vikavolt's speed tier is too slow. It's a hard mon to use. If you didn't want a pretty strong special breaker, you still have any of these guys while getting the speed tier for it. And you know, it could be Sandaconda, like it's an electric type that doesn't care about ground, and even if it didn't have Levitate, it would be neutral to ground due to its bug typing. But you know, being immune to spikes is always good. It hits very hard. It has the high special attack in the tier, so you know, you kind of have to respect it there. But yeah, Vikavolt, weird mon, like it's not mid, but it's more like it's just a weird mon to try and use. But it's a fun and strong mon in general. Guzzlord here. Should I be generous and put Guzzlord in B, or should I put in C? Because Guzzlord was like Mr. Potential, man. Like, if you saw the potential in it, you'll be like, oh, let me actually give it a shot to see if it can actually do what it needs to do. And like, you'll get mixed results overall. So it wasn't a consistent one by any means. So I'm going to put in C. And I know C stands for consistent. I lied, it's not, it doesn't stand for consistent. But yeah, you have to kind of take that into account. Sandaconda. These 5 were running the tier. I'm not gonna lie, these 5 were running the tier. It's crazy to me. But yeah, Sandaconda has to be here. Most consistent physical defense wall in the tier. Genuinely was annoying to deal with. It was spamming Glare, it was clicking EQ, it was getting up rocks, was running Rocky Helmet, so your physical attacking ones that could actually like threaten it to a certain extent, like Honchkrow and Scyther, were taking helmet damage. It was just an annoying one to deal with, and it was very consistent at what it did. Everyone that played this meta game knows what Sandaconda was capable of. You know, it was even running Coil Scale Shot set. I did try and run some offensive Sandaconda sets as a surprise factor. Surprise factor can get you very far. You know, obviously you have to worry about you know, stuff like Amoonguss and that, but if you get rid of Amoonguss, I do think Coil Sandaconda could run away with the game. You know, like it does have a decent attack stat of 107, so you know, when it has a +1 boost with good stab and Earthquake, it is very hard to switch into. But yeah, Berserker, another potential man. I did try and make this guy work. I'm gonna put it I don't know. I'm gonna put in B because like I know Bisharp was the premier steel type and all of that stuff, but you know, Berserker didn't have to deal with a Townsville fighting weakness. So if you ran an assault vest or even a physical defensive set, like taking super effective moves would probably be good on your side. You're probably not taking Ember Flare Blitz, I'll tell you that. That's not saving you at all. But you know, its typing is still quite solid. It's a mono steel type, so you know, it has a multitude of resistances. But it's just that the metagame was genuinely just hostile to it, even if it did want to run some of these support utility sets like Assault Vest, just because its speed stat is still too low. But it did have some decent damage output for sure. But yeah, it was just outclassed by Bisharp and other physical attackers just due to the fact that it's so slow. So it was very hard to try and use it effectively. But I do say it's better than these guys in C tier, because Guzzlord is Mr. Potential Man that didn't reach its potential. Sudowoodo's just niche. Viper just lacks the stats, and Vigoroth also in that situation was more of the fault that is a not fully evolved Mon, and the power level of this tier is the highest it's ever been realistically. But yeah, Houndstone I'm putting in A. Probably at the top of A. I think Houndstone is a bit underrated just due to the fact that it could probably wall every single physical attack if it wanted to. It could actually handle Bisharp quite effectively, even at +2, due to its ability Fluffy, which halves contact moves. So there's a thing where you could actually handle a lot of these physical attackers even more consistently than the likes of Sandaconda and Fizdev Blastoise, just due to your ability halving damage. So it was good in that sense. Obviously, Sandaconda could hit Earthquake, and you know, Earthquake doesn't cover Fluffy doesn't cover EQ due to the fact that EQ is not a contact move. But you know, it had Will-O-Wisp, it had Body Press, it had Nightshade for consistent damage on a lot of threats. And yeah, Houndstone never really let me down, but it just wasn't in this A+. Like, I felt like S and A+ were the entire metagame in my opinion. Then obviously you have these guys in A and B+, you know, popping up every once in a while to get it done. And obviously I'm still going to fill out this list here. But the Dunsparce, I'm putting in B+. I have to respect this one. I've lost to it a few times, and I'm going to put it above these guys actually. Like, put some respect on this guy. Calm Mind, Boom Burst, has Glare, genuinely is bulky enough, and like is hard to take out. Normal typing actually does help it defensively, because unless you're running a fighting type, and as you can see, we don't have a lot of those in this tier, you know, is non-stab fighting coverage versus the Dunsparce with like 125 HP, and it's just very hard to get rid of, to be honest. And it's bulky enough, it has the setup potential wing con, and yeah, just not as consistent as the rest of these guys, but you know, is a mon that you have to respect. Excelgor here, I'm putting Excelgor at the top of B, just because again is another mon that, you know, was spike stacking, and it was a dangerous mon to deal with, but it just lacks the damage, and you know, other than just setting up hazards, it didn't really have much of an impact on the metagame at large, in my opinion. But yeah, its speed stat is still solid, had some final gambit shenanigans, but overall it's leaning towards the niche side, in my opinion. Klinklang, as much as I love Klinklang and it's my favorite steel type of all time, I'm gonna have to put in Onmon. As the metagame was started, it was like in B, then it went down to C, and now I'm putting in Onmon, because genuinely it's impossible to use this Pokemon effectively. Like, I know some people might disagree. You know what? Klinklang Bias is my favorite steel type. I'm putting it in C. I know some people mentioned some banded gear grind set to actually get use of its decent attack stat, because shift gear is not sweeping anything in this tier, I'll be honest. Like, there's just too much lack of coverage for Klinklang for it to actually be effective. You know, your stab is resisted by Blastoise. Sandaconda doesn't really care because it's that bulky. Even Amoonguss and fire types, like Steel as an offensive attacking stat isn't really cutting it. Like, Bisharp gets away with it because, you know, Sylveon is common, and Bisharp has Dark Stab, which is very annoying to switch into. Klinklang doesn't really have anything else. It literally has Gear Grind, Wild Charge, and Return. That is literally his attacking options, and even Rhydon wouldn't be scared of Klinklang. That's just how bad it is in this metagame, which is a shame. If it was in a lower power metagame, maybe we didn't have bulky ass mons like Rhydon, Sandaconda, Blastoise, it could probably succeed, but yeah, it just never really took off at all. So yeah, you just have to take that into account. Samurott, also another mon that never really took off. Blastoise was outclassing it, Clawitzer was outclassing it. It just really lacked a use case for me, in my opinion, because like, if it was a Hisui Samurott, we'd be talking about a different mon in general. But yeah, this is the OG Samurott, 70 speed, so even the speed tile Bisharp, and it's not even like a 50, it's a 50-50 pretty much. Does it beat you or do you beat it? But yeah, very disappointing Pokemon in general. Guzzler's at the top of C because the potential it had never got reached, but the potential was a good niche to have in the tier. But yeah, Sinistra, Sinistra is still a good one. Like, I still want to put in B+. No, I'll put it at the top of B because I did like Choice Spec sets. Especially due to the fact of the surprise factor, and it was a mon that was getting spammed at the start of the month when people were, you know, using Sinistra to beat Sandaconda and Blastoise. But you know, it just started falling off a little bit as, you know, more consistent ghost types like Gengar got used and other special attackers that could actually deal with Sylveon more effectively, because Sylveon's existence just kind of put a wrench in Sinistra's like viability in the tier, in my opinion. And Amoonguss as well, like your grass type that sure doesn't lose to poison, but you know, you kind of have to be specs to deal damage to it, and like you could 1v1 it, but if Amoonguss was running toxic, you kind of were just losing that 1v1 battle, unfortunately. And due to the fact that Honchkrow was a Pokemon as well, really let Sinistra down. And finally, on to our last Pokemon here, Hisuian Zoroark. I'm gonna put in B+ as well. It's kind of the same as Monkey Dory, but it's like a physical attacking Gengar, but like you could actually outplay some things. I think I might put it at the top of B+. Yeah, it's just a physical attacking Gengar. It's a bit more versatile as well, and yeah, just not a mon I used particularly that often, so that's why I'm putting it in B+. But overall, this is the tier list, what it's looking like right now. I'm pretty sure I placed everything quite effectively. So yeah, this is the last tier list that I'm having for the October metagame, and I'm happy that we actually did have a ladder. Never actually ended up doing a laddering video. I guess I just got too busy, unfortunately, which is a shame, but you know, that's just how life is sometimes. And I'll be letting you guys know how the upload schedule is going to be going moving forward, just because I know I'm going to get too busy, and I do enjoy recording, but I do have to play mons less and less as time goes on. So that's why I like making those discussion videos, because there's always something to talk about when it comes to competitive Pokemon, in it. So yeah, I want to thank you guys for sticking along with me as this video was going on. Hopefully I didn't make it too long, but like, some people like the in-depthness I go into these Pokemon, and I do think I prefer to talk about these Pokemon for quite a while. But you know, I know how attention spans can get in this day and age, so you know, I'm not expecting everyone to watch the video to the end, but some people are like go in depth a bit more, so that's what I'm trying to do here. But yeah, thanks for watching this video, guys, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace.